Marty Williams. I'm a native of Washington, D.C., born, raised, and bred in D.C. And I guess for me, as far as photography, my journey with photography started when I was in elementary school. My parents gave me my first camera, and I don't know what grade I was in, but I was real young. My first camera was a Kodak Instamatic 104. It was a camera about the size of a cell phone. And the Kodak Instamatic used to use something called, they called a flash cube. It was a little cube, and you would take a picture, and the cube sat on top of the camera. You would take one picture, and the cube would turn into flash, and you could take like four pictures on a cube. So that was my first camera, and that was my first real introduction back to photography. This was in the mid 1960s, like I say, when I was in elementary school. And then from that point, you know, I was just taking pictures for fun back then. But then when I got a little older, I think around in high school, I kind of, you know, I was still shooting, kind of using the camera on and off. And then I went to college. I went to college at the University of Maryland. And when I got to college, I decided to take some photography courses. Again, we talking back in then, it was 1975, it was still film, it wasn't digital. So I took some photography courses at University of Maryland, and in my first class, we had to buy a camera. So I had to go out and I bought, at the time they just called them SLR, single lens reflex film cameras. And we learned basic photography, you know, the different settings on the camera. And we also learned darkroom, you know, how to load the film, how to expose it in the chemicals, and how to print. So we had to do all that in the photography classes that I took. I never liked darkroom work. I was one of those who just wanted to take the picture, I would send it off to wherever, the drugstore, whatever, and come back later and get my pictures. But I'm kind of glad that I learned how to do darkroom. I had to do it for the class, and it gave me a deeper appreciation of photography, you know, overall, learning the darkroom stuff. So I took photography when I was in college, you know, had my own little camera. And then after I graduated from college, you know, I was still kind of just shooting on my own, not really, still pretty much trying to figure my way out. And around about the early 1980s, I think it was, I was working full-time, not in photography, but I had gone to a wedding. One of my coworkers got married, and at the wedding, you know, I saw her photographer. So I decided to go up to him and just ask him, and I got to talking to him, and he said, well, you know, if you're really interested, he gave me his card and said, you know, just call me up sometime. So the photographer's name was John Holliday, and he was based in D.C. He was an older gentleman, and he did, most of his work, he did a lot of portraits and weddings. So I called him up, and he became really my first photographic mentor. I would go with him on jobs. He would show me a lot of stuff. He introduced me to some of the photographers in the DC area that he knew. And from there, my interest really started to kind of blossom and grow, because I was working with somebody who actually knew what they was doing, as I was still trying to, you know, figure my way out. So Mr. Holliday, I worked with him, and he actually, he was more than just a mentor. He actually became kind of a surrogate father for me. So for a while there, me and him were really close, you know, as we worked together. So I worked with him for a number of years, and then we kind of separated, you know, to a degree. But I still remembered, you know, a lot of what he taught me. And in the meantime, I was just, you know, I would do various jobs on my own. I would periodically do weddings and portraits and some other stuff. And at that time also, I was also doing photography for the church that I was a member of. And so I did a lot of church, you know, various programs within the church, special events. You know, I was one of the, at one point I was the only photographer for my church, you know, for a number of years. So that gave me, you know, more experience too. So I did that, and then, and again, this is still all film. This is before digital. So it was, I know it was a couple of years where I think I kind of got disinterested in photography, and I just kind of stopped. I stopped shooting altogether. And then I kept hearing about something called digital photography and didn't know what it was, but I kept hearing about it. I said, well, what is this digital they're talking about? So around in, I think probably 2004, I decided to buy a digital camera, not knowing fully what it was, but I figured it was still related to photography. So I bought my first digital camera. It was a Canon. For most of my career, I've used Canon cameras. Most of my film cameras were Canon. So I bought a Canon digital camera in 2004 and learned, you know, it wasn't no film, so I had to deal with this whole digital thing, you know, had to get a computer and just pretty much start learning more about digital photography. And through that, that's also when I started to go through various photographic conferences. The first conference, I think the first big conference I went to was the one that WPPI gives every year. And I started going to their conference out in Las Vegas. Started going there for a couple years and started to meet, you know, other photographers, you know, through that conference. And then New York held one every year called Photo Plus. It was normally in October every year. So I started going to Photo Plus. Again, started learning more stuff, started meeting more people, and, you know, kind of my digital knowledge kind of expanded from there. I was still trying to do portraits and weddings and stuff, still doing my work at church, and just, you know, meeting more photographers, just trying to learn more, you know, overall. One of the big things that happened to me, though, was in the year 2000, yeah. In 2000, there was this exhibition at one of the Smithsonian museums, and the exhibition was called Reflections in Black. And it was curated by a lady named Dr. Deborah Willis. I'd never heard of her, didn't know anything about her, but I decided to go check out this exhibition at the Smithsonian. So I went to the exhibition, and basically the exhibition was showing the work of black photographers. And I hadn't really known anything about black photography. I might have known Gordon Parks, but he was probably the only one that I, you know, that I was conscious of. But this exhibition was just all work on a whole bunch of black photographers that I'd never even heard of. So I was just fascinated. So they also had a companion book to go with the exhibition. So I bought the book, and I kept reading, learning about all these names that I never knew. I said, oh wow, and didn't realize that black people have been involved in photography pretty much from the beginning of what back in the 1900s. The original process was called daguerreotype, and then there were several transitions that led up to what we now call photography. So I started learning about all these photographers I never heard of, and also started to appreciate their work and the fact that they came before all of us. They kind of set the path for, you know, what we're doing now. So Deborah Willis, and she wrote that book, but she's either written or co-written so many books on black photographers, and I got a lot of them at home. If I see Deborah Willis's name on a book, more than likely I'm gonna buy it because I know it's worth getting. So through that exhibition and through her books, that really helped me gain a greater appreciation of black photographers in general and the type of work that the ones in the past and present, you know, continue to do.
So much history and knowledge. Thank you for just giving me just that little lesson, just the pathology of what made you really get into like knowing more about black photographers and allowing other black photographers knowing about other photographers that's out there?
Well, again, it was through that exhibition, the Reflections in Black exhibition, and you know, as I started to read more and just hear more, I would start, like if I, you know, with social media and the internet, You know, if I would see like an article or something about a photographer, I say, well, I never heard of this person, let me look them up. And a lot of times, once I read about them, would find information about them, I would see if there was a book about them. And again, I have now, I started collecting books by and about black photographers. So I know I have probably well over 150 such books now, you know, just on black photographers and their work. And again, we talk about photographers from the past and the present. I went, as a matter of fact, I was in New Orleans last week for a few days. And there's an exhibition there at the New Orleans Museum of Art it's called Studio Black Photographers, but it incorporates photographers not just in studio but outside the studio as well. And there's some names that I knew and some names that I didn't know, so I learned some additional names by going to that exhibition. And it's all just a process of learning about, you know, I'm big on giving praise to the people that came before me, the ancestors, because, you know, they set the path, like I said, for what we're doing now. And oftentimes these black photographers haven't gotten the publicity, the notoriety that a lot of the so-called, you know, white photographers have gotten. But when you take a look at the work that they've done, their work oftentimes is just as good, if not better, than those other photographers whose names, you know, that some people know. So what I've been trying to do, you know, with social media, if I hear about a book, you know, I'll normally post a book on my social media, on Facebook, or if there's an article or story about a photographer that I didn't know, I'll just post it. I'm just trying to throw the knowledge out there, and it might inspire somebody else to know about the person and to keep going, you know, with their own photography.
That's great. Thank you for that knowledge. Wrap this up because the conference about to start.
Okay.
Marty, I really appreciate this time and your knowledge. And, you know, I really do. Just one last thing. Could you tell, what could you tell to a beginner photographer who wants to get into this and really don't have like no foundation or no structure, or what should they do?
Okay, boy, let me see if I can give you a short answer. The first thing they probably need to do is just read and learn. You know, it's a lot of resources about photography now. I've heard some people use the internet to learn the basics. One of the things of photography, you gotta learn the basics. You gotta learn aperture, shutter speed, ISO, white balance. Those are 4 elements. You gotta learn how those 4 elements work together. I would suggest somebody just starting out, if you get a camera, to shoot in manual. Because if you shoot in manual, that's gonna force you to learn those 4 elements and how they work together. If you can, I would also say try and find a mentor, somebody, a more experienced photographer that is willing to kind of take you along and bring you along and show you stuff and teach you stuff. So those are some of the basic things I would say, you know, for somebody who's just beginning.
Man, thank you so much, Marty. Can you let the people know how to follow you on social media or your website?
Yes, on Facebook, it's just actually I have 2, Marty Williams and Marty Williams Photography, and on Instagram, I'm Mart Will Photo. Instagram, Mart Will Photo.
All right, thank you.